Davidge. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. This week I wanted to take time to talk a little bit about two different approaches or two different dangers we can have and how we approach life and troubles and problems. We're just finishing our series on Sit, Walk, Stand. And the last week we looked at stand and our spiritual warfare against Satan. And C.S. Lewis in his classic work, The Screwtape Letters, which dealt a lot about how Satan and his demons are involved in our everyday life. In the foreword to that work, he said the following. He said, there are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. Now, Lewis is using some pretty descriptive phraseology there, but what he's getting at is two different approaches we can take, and I think those two approaches really I see very often in Christian lives today. One of them is what Lewis refers to as the materialist. This is a person who sits and looks, and no matter what's going on around them, everything is simply natural. It has a natural material cause and explanation to it. So if I'm having troubles in relationships or things are going on in my life that are difficulty, maybe even a sickness or whatever else, always and only there are material reasons behind it, and that's simply how I look at it and approach it. Now, this is true even as a Christian. Many Christians would affirm the existence, obviously, of God, we would have to, and also Satan and his kingdom, but in practical terms, as I live my daily life, I can then live as a practical materialist or atheist, as if the reality of God and Satan, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of darkness, really make no difference in the way my daily life is conducted. And if someone is approaching life in this manner, then no matter what is happening, the problems are material and natural, and therefore the solutions, the way I'm going to work at them, can only be material and natural. And this can happen whether it's, again, in relationships like with two people in a marriage with one another. Sometimes the problems are natural and we need to apply better communication techniques, for example. But sometimes there are spiritual things going on, and all of the natural solutions in the world aren't going to address a spiritual issue. However, on the other hand, there's another ditch that we can run into on the opposite side. Sometimes we veer away from the materialist and we go to what Lewis referred to as the magician. And this is seeing everything as being directly attributable to God or Satan. And normally what I do is anything that's happening in my life that I don't like, that must be the devil. And therefore I have to tell him to get behind me. This is a cause for spiritual warfare. But in reality, life does not work that way. There are troubles and pains and difficulties that come into my life that are not directly attributable to the work of Satan or his demonic host, but rather come from a couple of other possible things. For example, first off, they can be simply because we live in a fallen, broken world. Every one of us, unless Jesus returns before we die, every one of us are eventually going to die. Our last sickness is going to get us. Our bodies are winding down. The older I become, the less capable my body is, and no amount of spiritual warfare is going to change that. That is the result of living in a fallen, broken world. But beyond that, there's also problems of I can sin myself. I can do sinful actions which bring results into my own life, and I can't attribute those results to Satan. If I lose my temper at work regularly and am screaming at the boss and doing things, and then that causes repercussions and I'm, say, fired from my job, I can't say, well, Satan is trying to attack me. No, my own behavior brought about and caused my problems. Sometimes it's also just foolish choices. They may not even be directly sinful. But for example, if I choose to eat poorly and not get enough rest, my body may break down and I start having sicknesses or pains or problems. And they're not Satan attacking me. It's not a spiritual warfare issue. It's simply I'm making poor choices, and those poor choices are producing what are obvious effects that are going to come into my life. In such cases, what I need to do is start making wise choices. It's not an issue of spiritual warfare. It's an issue of walking in wisdom. And the same thing even happens sometimes in relationships. Sometimes there's just relational difficulties. Sometimes there is a spiritual component, but sometimes there are simply natural things going on. So these are the two ditches that we can run into. And what I want to encourage us to think about, and I taught a lot about this in the 7-week series that I referenced on Sunday on spiritual warfare from 2017. You can go back and look that up. But I want to encourage us to not run into either one of those ditches. Everything in your life is not Satan attempting to attack you. Every trouble and problem you have is not that. However, with that being said, everything in your life is not simply natural and material. We are not materialists. We are not pure naturalists. We believe that God exists, and so does the enemy, Satan, and he is at work constantly around us. He is attempting to attack us, and we need to accurately diagnose. Is this something that's just going on? Have I made some poor choices? Or have I sinned in some way? Is this part of living in a broken world? Or does it seem like the enemy is actually attacking me or my family or getting in this particular relationship or sometimes in something in the church? Because if it's a natural thing, we attack that with natural weaponry, so to speak. But if it is actually a spiritual warfare attack coming, we have to use spiritual tools and weapons, which is primarily prayer, as we saw on Sunday. So I want to encourage us to think about that and act in this manner. And it means we are constantly walking along with God and seeking Him and saying, Lord, reveal to me what's the underlying cause, what's going on here, so I know what I am facing and therefore which tools are going to be best, which weapons are best to bring to this particular issue in my life. I hope this is helpful to you. Hope you have a great week, and I look forward to gathering for worship again this Sunday as we continue our series on Catechism, the Foundations of Our Faith. God bless.